I wasn't 100% sure on the title of this session, but it is something that we see quite a lot. We've got a number of businesses that we work with that do this type of work. So what I'm talking about specifically here is the selection process for a new software or solution into a business. And it's Skore's quite powerful for doing this, but a lot of businesses we see also don't do it until it's a little bit too late. And so I wanted to take you through what we've seen with some of the consultancies we work with and how they do this. I'm hoping to get one of them to come and present something similar in the future, but Friday mornings have been a bit of a challenge for them to come along and present to us, but hopefully at some point in the future. So what I'm going to do, just talk a little bit about the context. So I'm going to talk a bit about the process that you'd be going through to do this, and then we'll go in and look at how other people are doing this within Skore. So I'm going to start with the process. So I said this is about the context of what we're talking about, where this is actually happening. So we see it in a number of different businesses where, as an example, they're digital transformation consultancies. So they're working with businesses at the sort of strategic end of the process, and they might be sort of scanning the whole business and looking at what are the opportunities for digitizing different processes across the whole organization. Others can be a bit more specific, and a good example is Johnny Fox at Foxability, where he's looking at systems around the Xero accounting platform. So in that case, where you've got something like Xero, you've got a platform in place, but they have this huge ecosystem of apps that can plug into it. And so again, it is a solution selection, but they're doing it kind of narrowed down in terms of, okay, it's specifically around this particular platform. So typically what happens is the business is looking for, what are the needs of the business? What do we need to change, improve? What are the areas that we might be looking to digitize or automate? And as you can see, I've highlighted the bit we're looking here. It's okay, let's go out and see what the solution is. So it might be that the business is looking to improve the sales process, for example. Maybe they just want more visibility on the sales process. And so obviously you're going to be looking at some sort of customer relationship management system. So as I said, that's where we're looking at. Once you've selected a system, you then go and implement that system, and then you maintain and improve it. And I have to say that in most cases, when we talk to businesses who are starting to look at the processes around systems, it actually tends to be here at the implementation. They've already decided what system they want, and they're going straight into the implementation. Now that works, but it is much, much better if you can start to understand what the process is and be clearer about the requirements and how they relate to the processes much, much earlier on. It will make that part of the implementation part of the process much, much easier. So let's again just look a bit more detail around the solution selection piece. What I want to show here is the different parts of this process where Skore can support and really help. This is not obviously a detailed or exhaustive process, but essentially, you've got to the point where you said, okay, we're looking at the sales process and improving that using some sort of systems. So again, at that point, you're getting down to that next level of detail. Again, what are the real objectives for us here? Again, it's visibility of the sales process. It's about being able to track performance of that process. It might be that we're looking for a single source of customer data within the business, which actually has a wider impact, which I'll talk about in a second. You're then going to go in and start capturing the processes and business requirements. And we tend to do this, or we see this done at a relatively high level. And I think that to some extent bypasses the conversation about whether this is an as is or to be process, and you'll see that in a second. I'll touch that on a bit more, but it's really about giving a framework in which you can start to hang the requirements off and discuss the requirements again in context. what happens then after you go and do the market research to find out what the potential solutions are available, and then you might go and do an RFI, a request for further information. So again, from the information you've gathered during your process discovery piece, you can actually provide that information quickly and easily to potential vendors for them to come back and say, yes, we can do this, or no, we can't. And then again, conducting demos. So if you can then provide the processes, even if they're quite high level, to the vendors when they're, in advance of them coming to a demo, how they respond to that and what they actually show you during the demo will tell you an awful lot about that vendor and whether you can work with them. Again, I'm just thinking of Toby Chisnell at the Next Story. I think it was Toby was explaining that some vendors will turn up and they haven't used your process at all, and they'll just show you what they want to show you. Others will come in and they'll have put something together around your process, and then they'll be quite open and say, okay, here this works really well, here it doesn't work so well, but this is what we would suggest instead, or how we do it differently. And I think one of the really important things that again sometimes gets missed at this stage is that you're not, when you're selecting a system like this, this is going to be a significant investment of time and money. You also need to think about, are you working with the right company? Okay, it's not just about the features and functionality of the tool, but so the way that they respond to these steps and the way they interact with you is just as important as the requirements themselves. And then hopefully at that point you've gathered all the information you need to go and actually make your selection. So does that make sense? Has anyone got any experience of some of these things that I've talked about? I think a thumbs up from James there. Which side of it? Spending the time doing this up front or not?
Well, no, the piece that came to mind was in a demo of a large MRP system. When I say MRP, I mean thinking about the manufacturing operations side of it. We all sat in a dark room for a day, and whenever somebody was asked a question, that it seemed like two software engineers were recoding the system before they could show us. Yes, it's surreal almost.
Yeah. Or there's also the ones where they'll say yes to everything, but then don't show you or can't show you because for whatever reason it's too complicated.
Yeah, and I think it's important, Craig. You were saying, well, in all kind of business, really, but about can you work? Basically, the question was you were posing indirectly was, can you work with these people?
Yeah.
And it's about you might have a dream car and you can buy a dream car, but you can never get it serviced. And it's this, a similar metaphor, really. It looks great, but it isn't going to work for us.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. If you go back up to this level, if you don't think about all of those things here, and you get it wrong, you're in a long-term relationship with this supplier. And so it's really important as to be sure that you can work with them. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to go back up and talk now. Just talk a little bit about how we do it, or how we've seen other businesses approach this. So one of the tools that I found incredibly powerful for this is the business on a page. We've covered it before in previous sessions, and it's available in the template library. We've got two different versions of it. We've got one for a sort of small to medium sized business, and then we've got one for a kind of larger enterprise. Here I've taken the smaller version just to keep it quite simple, and I've added a bit of extra information to it. The business on a page, the purpose of this is it's essentially to get your top level framework of your processes. But the value of it in this particular context is about getting the leadership team together and be very clear about their roles and responsibilities, and where there's going to be an impact to the business from this piece of work. So talking about the digital transformation strategists, they're scanning the whole business looking for opportunities to automate and digitize. So that obviously it makes a huge amount of sense to get these people in the room. In fact, one example we worked with, there was the digital transformation program was being led by the CEO, who was very enthusiastic about it, but other members of the leadership team weren't so enthusiastic. And running this simple exercise, so essentially what we did is we put the main boxes up on the page, and then we got the leadership team together in a meeting and just got them to talk through the boxes and got them to agree who owns each step or key process area and what were the relationships between those activities. And in this particular example, the CFO was particularly excited about the digital transformation, was talking about all the things that she wanted to do as part of it. And that was really quite infectious with the rest of the team. And some of the more resistant members of the team, she was saying to them, well, you could be doing this and you could make that easier. And it really sort of got this a lot more buy-in at that level, which was really quite powerful. The other aspect of it, of course, is that if we take the sales process, I've been using that as the example. You'll see that's the one that's got the detailed view on here, which we're going to go into in a second. But it's also very easy to forget that if you're implementing a system like a CRM, it's likely to touch other parts of the business and not just the sales team. And if you focus on the sales team in isolation, you could actually be creating other problems elsewhere. Now, in the example I talked about, where one of your objectives might be a single view of customer records across the business, so you're going to be driving that through the sales process, but you're going to recognize that actually marketing are probably going to have an input to this. Once you've done the sale, your operations and delivery and your customer support are all going to need access to that data to have that single view of the customer record, however that access might happen in future. So again, having this level helps other parts of the business start to understand, okay, I'm going to be impacted. My teams need to be involved in that to be able to provide input to the business requirements. So from this level, we drill down again for a sort of small to medium sized business. We found that this kind of level was probably enough detail to go to at this point. And as I said, we can almost bypass the discussion about whether we need to capture an as-is process or to be, because at this level in the sales process, we're generating leads, we're going to progress the opportunities and then agree the commercials at the end of it. Like that process stays the same. However we do it is the next level of detail down. Now, from time to time, you may need to drill down into the next level of detail. So I've got an example here. Here I've mapped a process, but actually I have seen quite often at this stage just listing boxes. So in another example with a legal services company, they had different product lines that they sold, and they had, say, different compliance requirements and various other requirements. So actually what they did is they listed out the 4 or 5 product lines just as 4 or 5 what boxes on the page, and then attached the requirements to those. So let me just show you what I'm talking about by requirements here. Generally talking about sort of quite high level business requirements, but if I drop into edit mode and show you how we do that. So I'll take a box here. We've got a box set follow update. So using the attachment panel here, I'm just going to use custom fields. So add a new custom field. I'll go and type the name. I've already used business requirement on here, so that's available. The other thing that we found really powerful, and I think this might have been one of the reasons why we put the grouping in the custom field in the first place, was in the business requirements, there's different models for doing this. I've traditionally used the Moscow model. So when you take a requirement, is this a must-have? Like, does the system absolutely have to do this? We couldn't do without this particular requirement. Is it a should-have, i.e., really we should have this, but we could live without it? Or is it a could have, which is more of a sort of nice to have? It'd be great if it did that, but actually it's not going to have a major impact on us as a business. And so you can quickly select one of these, put your requirement. We need the ability to set a follow up with a reminder, something like that. Excuse my spelling, typing. So I can save that against the the activity using standard custom field. So what I'm going to do is just go back up to the level above. As I said, more often than not, we tend to be sitting at this level of detail and capturing them. But as a result of doing it at this level, what you find is there's often lots of requirements against the boxes. There'll be lots and lots of discussion around what we'd like to have and what we'd like to see. So you'll see here, I've got an example of 9 requirements. I've seen some where there's been 30 to 40 requirements captured against a single watt box in the system. You'll find that often there's a lot of those are duplicates. Different people in the room will describe often the same thing in slightly different ways. It's better to have all of it in there and then review it and refine it later on. You'll start to see, okay, actually that's just the same as that, or we can adjust that one slightly to do it. So essentially what you've done now is you've gathered all the information, which is great. But one of the things that's been really powerful in this is when we can then jump over to the analytics screen. So if I hit analytics at the top, you'll see, because we've been using the business requirement custom field, we get that extra tab appears that's generated automatically. And when I click on this, I can very, very quickly see a breakdown of how many must-haves, could-haves, and should-haves. And this is always a really, really interesting exercise at this point to sit with the group that you've been gathering it, because when you're going out to look for vendors, it will be almost impossible to find a solution that is a perfect fit for what you are trying to do or what you would ideally like to do. And the problem here is that if you have too many must-haves, then it's going to be almost impossible to find a vendor who can come back and honestly say they can do it, or they'll say they can do it, but it will be a clunky workaround for something which actually could end up just causing you more pain later on. So this is a great way just to sort of bring that home to the team, saying, okay, we need more flexibility. When we go and look out at the different systems, some of them might do things we haven't even thought about yet, and that could be we might be prepared to pay a bit of a higher price in some areas in order to get benefits in others. Most likely, if you stick with too many must-haves and then you whittle it down to the one vendor who can just about fulfill most of those things, that again is probably not a great basis for a long-term relationship with that vendor. And you're also more likely to end up in a situation going, well, we never really got what we wanted in the first place, and that sort of kind of negative attitude towards it. So again, really, really good to be able to sort of see that. And here we then see the list of all the different must-haves and could-haves. So you can then go through and have a conversation with the team about this. Look, there's one here, a notification to biz devs when they've been assigned a new list. Actually, is that really a must-have? If there was a report that they could see on a Monday morning, that would be just as good as a notification. So here you can click back through, having had that discussion, you can go back to your requirement there and say, actually, this is a should have or a could have, whatever it is, and you can restructure it that way. And that gives you that ability to then keep going back and checking, okay, have we got a much better balance or breadth of different levels of requirement? And finally, of course, just before we final, once we've done that and we've sort of analyzed the requirements and got a much better balance on the could haves, should haves, and must haves, that's where we might then drop out our RFI information, so our request for information that we want to send to the vendors. So that at this point can be done really easy through the reports. So we hit the reports, we go to the attachments. If you're using different types of attachments or different custom fields, and obviously you can filter out, so it's just the business requirements. But at this point, I can then export this out to a spreadsheet, drop that out, and that can be then sent on to the different vendors. You might want to do a bit of refinement beforehand, just before you send it, but it makes it really, really easy. Of course, the other thing I mentioned before, you might have duplicates, so you need to go through and refine, remove any duplicates in there before you send that off. And then, of course, going back to the process, if you have got any of the sort of additional detail processes at this level, this is the point where I said you might want to actually go map one or two of these processes in that next level of detail, and then you print them out to a PDF and send them over to the vendor before running any demos. And hopefully that should give you a lot, you've created a real kind of common language between what you want in the business and the same model that you're sharing them with the vendors, to make sure that you're getting all the right information in a consistent way to make that selection decision at the end. And I'll stop at that point and see if there's any questions or thoughts.
Yeah, great. So for me, seeing the use of that that custom field is going to solve a problem for me. So we're doing a piece of work at the moment, developing a new piece of software, which I have just taken over. And the scope creep has just been amazing. We were supposed to get something in sort of January. We still don't have it, and it's not a particularly complicated piece of work. It's not tied to a process, but it doesn't have really a clear set of requirements. So yeah, I'm really stoked to have seen this, right, and know that actually very, very quickly, half a day, I'm going to be able to solve this problem.
Yeah, interesting. The guys at Lawrence and Wedlock, they're one of our partners that work in the automation space. They were talking about how much time and pain it saved them in terms of pre-score and pre-doing the gathering discovery piece this way. They were getting a lot of scope creep, mainly because there was a misunderstanding between what the developers understood the requirements they'd been given and what the customer understood the requirements to mean.
Yeah.
And this was that sort of common language. It gave them a very clear picture, and they said actually it reduced the amount of time it took them to get an automation out, because it reduced the number of questions that the developers had kept going back to the customer with. It was much, much clearer.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Actually, I've got a call on it this afternoon.
Yes, it's perfect timing then.
So it's timely as well.
David, I guess, do you do the similar sort of thing to this?
Yeah, we do. So we actually use it more at the moment in terms of our current customers, in terms of trying to define, you're absolutely right, in terms of trying to actually scope out the design requirements in terms of new things which they actually need in existing systems, or perhaps moving out from their systems into sort of new areas, or bringing new modules on board. I totally agree with you that this is absolutely great in terms of customers wanting to go out to the market and trying to actually get all their thoughts down in terms of a visual process. I suppose from a technology vendor's point of view, so, our organization, we're IT consultancy, and we're also a technology vendor as well. And I'd love to do this with every single customer out there who's going to put out a tender or an RFI. So this is not a Skore issue, but this is actually more of a market awareness issue. It's trying to actually get to those particular organizations to be able to do this, obviously, before you receive the tender. So it's many times, which has happened in the past, and it continues to happen at the moment, and it's really, really frustrating for suppliers such as ourselves, is that you actually reach out to the organizations who push out the tender and go, look, we'd like to have a completely free session with you beforehand. What it's going to do is actually help you with the tender process. It's not going to link back to us perhaps getting an advantage on it, but the response usually is, sorry, you've got to wait for the Excel spreadsheet to come out. You get the RFI, you get about a 50-page tender document, and you go, oh my God, I've got to fill in 500 lines on an Excel spreadsheet. And most of those are completely inappropriate. Yeah. So I think it's a market awareness thing. And what we're sort of trying to do, try to get to as many organizations as possible before they actually even get to the stage of pushing out a tender. So we're sort of trying to promote it almost as like free
Yeah.
consultancy. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's difficult. Once somebody's made up their mind to go down a tender route, then it's virtually impossible for somebody to be able to get to them to be able to do this exercise, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's interesting. The team at Skore, I mean, they make it sort of one of the things they say is they're agnostic to all technologies. They're just there to advise from a sort of strategic point of view. So they're brought in early on to do that. But I think going back to the process I was showing before, as I said at the time, more often than not, people are here when they're doing this. And one of the things that causes confusion there is then they're trying to often capture both business and functional requirements at the same time, and get sort of confused about the difference between those things. If you think about it in terms of the process, generally you're looking at business requirements here and functional requirements there. Then actually it doesn't matter if you've described them in a similar or same way, because they're at different phases of the process. But when you're here, it becomes a bit harder. And again, we get feedback. It's like, okay, we've done a requirements gathering session, but we didn't get the level of detail we really needed at that point, or we got we've been overwhelmed with detail, or whatever it is. So it makes sense, but I agree. It's that there's an awareness piece that more people need to know they should be doing this earlier on. Any other thoughts or questions?